I'm David Coates. I work in the Department of Parks and Wildlife in West Australia. I'm a conservation biologist, broadly speaking, I suppose. I'm a senior principal research scientist and coordinate a program called Plant Science in the Herbarium in the department. So it's a research program which focuses on conserving the flora of West Australia. My background is, originally I was an evolutionary biologist, conservation geneticist, I suppose. And more recently well, not more recently, but in the last 20, 30 years I've been working on a whole range of different research projects which involve how we conserve the plants of West Australia, particularly threatened species. So what I want to talk a little bit more about today is threatened species conservation, threatened plant species conservation in West Australia, the sort of work we do, the research we do and why we do that research, keeping in mind that the research is always focused on how we can prevent extinction of those species. So the area which I do most of my work in is in the southwest of West Australia. It's one of the world's biodiversity hotspots, viewed as a biodiversity hotspot because it's where we have a very large number of threatened species, both plants and animals. It's also an area where we have a large number of what we call threats. So we have many species where we think extinction is likely to happen within the next couple of decades unless we can do something about it. So some of the work we do on plants involves a lot of ecological studies, it involves genetic research, population biology research, reproductive biology, all aimed at trying to figure out how we can prevent these plant species from going extinct. And just to give you a few statistics, we have about 300 plus threatened plants in the southwest. We have 450 odd in the state of Western Australia, and we don't just focus on the southwest, we do work in the Pilbara and the Kimberley, but I guess much of our attention's on the southwest because that's where most of our threatened plant species currently are. We also have about 2,000 what we call rare plants, which are plants we don't know very much about. They're rare and poorly known, but we think many of them are threatened and probably critically endangered. So the sort of work we do involves some of what happens here in this Threatened Flora Seed Centre, in this research facility, the Kerry McNamara Conservation Science Centre. We also do genetics work here, we also do ecological research here, and we also have the West Australian Herbarium, which houses all the plant specimens, a bit like a museum, I suppose. A plant museum houses something like 750,000 plant specimens for the state of West Australia. The work that I particularly am interested in is some of our threatened plant species in the southwest. We've been working on a number of Banksia species, and one of these, I've got some cones here, which have just recently been burnt. Banksias and many other of our native plant species are what we call serotinous. They require fire to release the seed from the little capsules you can see on the cone, and they go through wet-dry cycles which allow that seed to be ultimately released into the soil. But we're doing this effectively artificially because we want to extract the seed and we want to put that seed either into seed storage, or in this particular case we want to use that seed to do reintroduction. So for a lot of our species we're now looking at reintroducing them back into the wild, using the seed in the seed soil facility to create and establish new populations. This is because many of the populations of these species are very small. We suspect they aren't likely to persist over any great period of time. And many of them are also threatened by a disease called Phytophthora dieback, which is a major problem with many of our plant species in the southwest. We believe something like 3,000 plant species are likely to be susceptible to this disease, and many of those are threatened. So we're trying to establish new populations in areas where the disease doesn't exist. And we need to establish populations of a fairly large number of plants. Genetically, we're looking at population sizes of 250 to 500 because that's the number which we think will be genetically viable, because we're establishing populations not just to do a gardening exercise, not just to make them grow, but also to allow them to reproduce, recruit, produce new progeny and establish and persist over long periods of time. So creating new populations is a major challenge because it's something which has not really been done before in It's been done around the world in bits and pieces, but we don't have a lot of technological data about how long these populations are likely to persist. So again, part of the research we do and the genetic research we do looks at how we might improve the establishment of these populations and ultimately get successful establishment. Some of the work we do is particularly focused on areas like the Stirling Range National Park and some of the other national parks in the southwest. Stirling Range is particularly interesting to us because it's floristically very unique. It's got a large number of species which only occur in that area and nowhere else. But unfortunately, it also happens to be an area where we have significant Phytophthora dieback infection. So about 65% of the park is infested with this disease. Hence, the aim is to try and look at how we establish some of these species elsewhere, either within the park where there's no disease or more likely outside the park where there's no disease. So the work that I do really focuses on how we can prevent extinction of plant species. We do have a significant challenge within Western Australia because of the numbers of plant species we have, but that's not necessarily unusual compared to other parts of the world as well. There are other biodiversity hotspots with very large numbers of plant species which face the same problems. We also have areas in the wheat belt of the state where we have substantial land clearing and habitat fragmentation where many of our plant species now persist as small isolated populations. That's a different challenge to disease, but in that case we're looking at how we can increase population sizes, increase genetic diversity in those populations to enable them to persist over long periods of time as well. So we do other research within the program which I'm responsible for, not that I'm involved with this research specifically in relation to taxonomic and systematic research, understanding and describing new species within West Australia. We describe something like up to 100 new species a year in the state, so we still don't know our flora particularly well in the case of understanding what we have and where it is. In terms of the work done in the Threatened Flora Seed Centre, one of the key aspects of this work is as a backup to preventing, or if we have extinction, that we still have seed material of these plant species still available to us to do reintroductions. We set the seed store up in 1992 or 93. It was one of the first in Australia, and I believe one of the first in the world of this sort to be set up to do seed collections of all our threatened plants. We now have the majority of our threatened plants in seed storage. We believe the seed in this facility could last for hundreds, perhaps even thousands of years. Some of the seed we know has very long lifespan under the conditions in which we store it. We might show you some of those conditions in a while, but we're looking at very low humidity, drying the seed down to very low water content, and then they go into minus 20 degrees. And we believe in those conditions the seed can last for many, many decades. Therefore, it's a particularly important gene bank, if you like, of the material we have of our threatened species, and even if we do have extinction, we still have that backup. So the ultimate aim of this work is to look at how we can better conserve the flora of West Australia, as I said, particularly focusing on threatened species, and trying to prevent as best as we can extinction occurring in our flora. And I suppose if I can finish up by saying that one of the things which we've been looking at more recently is what's called Extinction Debt, which is trying to determine what the level of extinction will be in the future. We know things are going to go extinct. We suspect they will ultimately. We can certainly mitigate against that in relation to seed storage and reintroductions, but the extinction debt we have in our flora we think is going to be significant, and predicting that and then being able to plan for that is going to be still one of the big challenges we're going to have for the future.